The FBI agents arrived at the elegant colonial home in Alexandria, Virginia, on a gray November morning in 1975, and the woman who answered the door was everything an American general's wife should be: poised, gracious, impeccably dressed, her hair styled in the conservative manner appropriate for a woman of her status and age. Her name was Elena Morrison, and for 30 years she had been married to Major General Robert Morrison, a decorated World War II veteran who had risen through the ranks to become one of the most respected figures in American military intelligence. Elena greeted the FBI agents with a smile, assuming they were there on some routine matter related to her husband's security clearance, and she invited them into the living room where family photographs covered every surface, documenting 3 decades of what appeared to be a perfect American life. But the lead agent, a man named Thomas Parker, who had been investigating Elena for 18 months, did not sit down. Instead, he looked at this elegant woman who had fooled everyone for so long, and he said 6 words that would destroy the Morrison family and reveal one of the most successful Soviet intelligence operations of the Cold War. "We know who you really are, Ekaterina." Elena's face did not change expression, but something flickered in her eyes, a recognition that the game was finally over, that the identity she had maintained for 30 years was about to be stripped away. The woman standing in that living room was not Elena Morrison, American patriot and devoted military wife. She was Ekaterina Volkov, a KGB operative who had been recruited in 1943 at age 19, trained in espionage and seduction, and inserted into post-war Europe with a single mission: infiltrate American military intelligence by any means necessary, including marriage. And she had succeeded beyond the KGB's wildest expectations, spending 3 decades married to a man who had access to some of America's most closely guarded secrets. A man who loved her completely and had never once suspected that his wife was his enemy. This is the story of one of the most devastating betrayals in American military history, a 30-year deception that compromised national security and destroyed a family that had no idea they were living with the enemy. If you want to hear more stories about the secrets hidden in plain sight during the Cold War, stories about deception, espionage, and the lies that shaped history, subscribe to this channel. You won't believe how this ends. Ekaterina Volkov was born in Moscow in 1924 to a family of committed Bolsheviks who had risen to positions of moderate influence within the Soviet bureaucracy. Her father worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Her mother was a professor of languages, and Ekaterina grew up in relative privilege, educated in English, French, and German, trained in music and literature, and all the accomplishments expected of an upper-class young woman. She was beautiful in a classical way, with high cheekbones and dark hair, and eyes that could project whatever emotion was required. And by the time she was 16, it was clear to her parents and to certain people in Soviet intelligence that Ekaterina possessed an unusual talent for reading people and giving them exactly what they wanted to see. In 1943, when Ekaterina was 19 years old, and the Soviet Union was fighting for its survival against Nazi Germany, she was approached by a recruiter from the NKVD, the predecessor to the KGB, who saw in this intelligent, beautiful, multilingual young woman the perfect candidate for a particular kind of espionage. The Soviet Union needed intelligence on its wartime allies, particularly the Americans, who would emerge from the war as either partners or rivals, and the most effective way to gather such intelligence was through human sources, through relationships built on trust and maintained over years. Ekaterina was told that she would be trained as an illegal agent, someone who would live abroad under a false identity, and that her primary mission would be to infiltrate American military or intelligence circles through whatever means necessary, including romantic or sexual relationships. The training that followed was intensive and brutal, designed to strip away Ekaterina's natural personality and replace it with a constructed identity that could withstand years of scrutiny. She learned how to create and maintain a legend, a false background story complete with forged documents and planted memories. She learned how to manipulate conversations to gather information without being obvious, how to use emotional connections as tools rather than authentic experiences, how to lie convincingly even to people who loved her. She learned cryptography and dead drops and brush passes and all the tradecraft that would allow her to communicate with her handlers without detection. And most importantly, she learned how to separate her real self from her cover identity so completely that she could live as someone else for years, even decades, without the mask ever slipping. By early 1945, as the war in Europe was ending, Ekaterina had been given her mission parameters. She would be inserted into occupied Germany as Elena Kovacs, a Hungarian refugee whose family had been killed by the Nazis and who was desperately seeking protection and a way to rebuild her life. Her cover story was elaborate and backed by forged documents that would stand up to reasonable scrutiny. She spoke flawless English with a slight Eastern European accent that would seem authentic to Americans who encountered her. She had been taught American cultural references and mannerisms, how to seem vulnerable and grateful and appropriately feminine according to American expectations. And she had been given one clear objective: find an American military officer with access to sensitive information, make him fall in love with her, and marry him. Ekaterina, now Elena, was deployed to Vienna in March 1945, just as the city was being occupied by Allied forces. She worked as a translator for the American military government, a position that gave her access to American officers and that seemed perfectly natural, given her language skills and her status as a displaced person grateful for American protection. She was assigned to the office that handled intelligence coordination between American and Soviet forces, a posting that her KGB handlers had carefully engineered, and she quickly became known as competent, charming, and tragically beautiful in her quiet dignity as a woman who had lost everything to the war. It was in that office that she met Captain Robert Morrison, a 32-year-old Army intelligence officer from Virginia who had distinguished himself during the war and who had been assigned to Vienna to work on the complicated task of managing the Allied occupation. Robert was tall and serious and deeply patriotic, the kind of man who believed absolutely in American values and in the importance of his mission to help rebuild Europe. He had grown up in a wealthy Virginia family, attended West Point, served with distinction in both the European and Pacific theaters, and had every intention of making the Army his career. He had never been married, had spent the war years focused entirely on his duty, and he approached his work with an intensity that left little room for personal relationships. But when Robert met Elena, something shifted in him. She was unlike any woman he had encountered. Intelligent enough to understand his work, vulnerable enough to need his protection, beautiful enough to make him feel things he had carefully suppressed during the war years. Elena played her role perfectly, initially keeping professional distance, then gradually allowing Robert to see signs of interest that seemed genuine because they were so carefully calibrated. She mentioned casually that she had no family left, that she felt lost in a world that had destroyed everything she had known, that she found Robert's dedication to rebuilding Europe deeply moving. She asked him questions about America that made him want to tell her everything, to share his love for his country and his hopes for the future. She created moments of apparent vulnerability where Robert could comfort her, establishing an emotional connection that felt profound to him because he had never experienced anything like it. Within 6 months, Robert was completely in love with Elena, and in October 1945, he proposed marriage. Elena accepted with what appeared to be tears of grateful joy, and Robert believed that he was saving this wonderful woman from the destruction of war-torn Europe, giving her the chance for a new life in America. The wedding took place in Vienna in November 1945, a small ceremony attended by Robert's colleagues and a few of Elena's supposed friends, who were actually KGB operatives helping maintain her cover. Robert arranged for Elena's immigration to the United States, and in January 1946, they arrived in Washington, D.C., where Robert had been assigned to work at the Pentagon, in a position that gave him access to highly classified information about American military capabilities and strategic planning. For Elena, now legally Elena Morrison with American citizenship papers secured through her marriage, the real work was just beginning. Her mission was to gather intelligence from Robert without making him suspicious, to use her position as his wife to gain access to information that could be passed to Soviet handlers, and to maintain this deception for as long as necessary. The KGB had trained her well, and she executed her mission with remarkable discipline and skill. She became exactly what an American general's wife should be. She joined the appropriate social clubs, made friends with other military wives, hosted dinners and cocktail parties where military men and their wives would gather and conversation would flow freely. She decorated their home in tasteful American style, learned to cook American food, adopted American mannerisms and expressions until her Eastern European origins became just an exotic detail rather than anything that raised suspicion. Robert loved her completely, trusted her absolutely, and never suspected that his wife was carefully documenting his conversations, memorizing the names and positions of everyone he worked with, noting his schedule and his assignments and any classified information he mentioned. Elena had been trained to have a nearly photographic memory for certain types of information, and she could reconstruct entire conversations hours after they happened, could remember the exact wording of documents she glimpsed in Robert's briefcase when he brought work home. She passed this information to her KGB handler through a series of carefully arranged meetings, disguised as shopping trips or visits to friends, using coded messages and dead drops that left no traceable connection between her and Soviet intelligence. The first years of their marriage were challenging for Elena in ways her training had not fully prepared her for. Living as someone else 24 hours a day, maintaining a performance that could never slip even for a moment, required a kind of psychological compartmentalization that was exhausting. Robert was a good husband, attentive and loving in his reserved way, and Elena found herself having to constantly remind herself that his love was directed at a fiction, at the Elena she had created rather than at Ekaterina, who actually existed beneath the performance. She had moments of what might have been loneliness or alienation, moments when she wondered who she actually was anymore after years of pretending to be someone else. But she suppressed these thoughts ruthlessly because they interfered with her mission. In 1948, Elena gave birth to their first child, a son they named Robert Jr., and this complicated her situation enormously. The KGB had not explicitly instructed her to have children, but they also had not forbidden it, and Elena understood that having children would make her cover story more convincing, would make it harder for anyone to suspect that this devoted mother was actually a Soviet spy. But the reality of being pregnant and then caring for an infant while also maintaining her espionage activities was difficult, and Elena found herself experiencing unexpected emotions toward this child who was both American and hers, both part of her cover and part of her actual life. She pushed these feelings aside, focused on her mission, and continued passing information to her handlers even as she nursed her newborn son. 2 more children followed, a daughter named Margaret in 1950 and another son named David in 1953. With each child, Elena's cover became more solid and her ability to move freely became more restricted, but she adapted her methods accordingly. She used her role as a military wife and mother to gather information at social events, at schools where military families' children attended, at functions where generals' wives were expected to be present. She had access to conversations and social circles that would have been closed to a single woman, and she exploited this access systematically while presenting herself as just another American housewife focused on her children and her home. Robert's career continued to advance throughout the 1950s and into the 1960s. He rose from captain to major to lieutenant colonel to colonel, eventually achieving the rank of Major General in 1968. Each promotion gave him access to more sensitive information, and each promotion made Elena's intelligence value to the Soviet Union more significant. By the late 1960s, Robert was working in strategic planning at the Pentagon, involved in high-level decisions about nuclear weapons deployment, NATO strategy, and contingency plans for potential conflicts with the Soviet Union. He brought work home regularly, discussed strategy with colleagues during dinners at the Morrison house, and never once considered that his wife might be documenting everything and passing it to the enemy. Elena's handlers in the KGB were pleased with the intelligence she provided over the years. She had given them detailed information about American military capabilities, strategic thinking, personnel movements, and countless other details that helped Soviet intelligence build a comprehensive picture of American military planning. She had identified other American officers who might be vulnerable to recruitment. She had provided context and analysis that helped the Soviets understand American decision-making processes. She was considered one of their most valuable long-term assets, someone who had successfully infiltrated American military circles at the highest levels and who showed no signs of being detected. But maintaining this deception for decades took an enormous psychological toll on Elena that she could never fully acknowledge even to herself. She had spent 30 years living as someone she was not, had raised 3 children who thought she was their American mother when she was actually a Soviet operative using them as cover, had slept beside a man for 3 decades who loved Elena Morrison when Ekaterina Volkov felt nothing for him except the professional detachment necessary to use him as a source. She had celebrated American holidays and sung American songs and pledged allegiance to a flag that represented her enemy. And somewhere in the decades of performance, the line between Elena and Ekaterina had become blurred in ways that disturbed her when she allowed herself to think about it. For 30 years, Ekaterina Volkov successfully deceived everyone around her, including the man who loved her and the children who called her mother. She passed countless secrets to Soviet intelligence while playing the role of the perfect American wife. But in the early 1970s, a series of events would finally expose her true identity and destroy the family she had built on a foundation of lies. If you're shocked by what you've heard so far, wait until you hear how the FBI finally caught her and what happened to the family when they learned the truth. Keep watching. The beginning of Elena's downfall came from an unexpected source, a KGB defector named Yuri Nosenko, who fled to the West in 1964 and spent years being debriefed by American and British intelligence. Nosenko had worked in the KGB's Second Chief Directorate and had knowledge of various Soviet intelligence operations, including references to long-term illegals who had been inserted into Western countries in the years immediately after World War II. Among the hundreds of pieces of information Nosenko provided was a vague reference to a female agent who had been deployed to Vienna in 1945 with instructions to marry an American military officer. The information was fragmentary, and Nosenko did not know the agent's operational name or her current identity, but it was enough to prompt the FBI to begin a quiet investigation into American military officers who had married foreign women in the immediate post-war period. The search parameters were broad. Women who had married American officers in occupied Europe between 1945 and 1947, who claimed to be refugees from Eastern European countries, who had subsequently moved to the United States and maintained close marriages to men with access to classified information. Hundreds of women fit these general criteria, and the FBI began the painstaking process of investigating each one, looking for inconsistencies in their stories or suspicious patterns in their behavior. Elena Morrison came to the FBI's attention in 1973 when an analyst noticed that her background story, while superficially convincing, had certain details that seemed too perfect, too carefully constructed. Her claimed Hungarian identity could not be verified through any records that survived the war. Her supposed family members who had been killed by the Nazis left no documentary evidence of ever having existed, and her work as a translator in Vienna had brought her into contact with exactly the kind of American officers who would be valuable intelligence targets. These discrepancies were subtle enough that they had not raised suspicion in 1945 when Robert had arranged her immigration, but they became more suspicious when viewed through the lens of a possible Soviet intelligence operation. The FBI began surveillance of Elena in late 1973, watching her movements, monitoring her communications, photographing everyone she met. For 2 years, they found nothing overtly suspicious. Elena seemed to be exactly what she appeared to be, a devoted wife and mother whose life revolved around her family and her social obligations as a general's wife. But the surveillance team noted certain patterns that seemed unusual. Elena frequently went shopping alone and spent longer in certain stores than seemed necessary. She took walks in parks at specific times. She had a habit of browsing in bookstores and occasionally moving books from one shelf to another. These behaviors could have been innocent, but to trained counterintelligence officers, they looked suspiciously like tradecraft, like the actions of someone servicing dead drops and receiving communications from handlers. The FBI decided to set a trap. They arranged for Robert to be given access to a specific piece of classified information that was actually disinformation, false intelligence that would be useless to the Soviets, but that would serve as a tracer if it appeared in Soviet intelligence channels. Robert was told about supposed new NATO deployments in West Germany, details that were specific enough to seem genuine, but that were actually complete fabrications. The FBI knew that Robert often discussed work with Elena over dinner, and they were betting that if Elena was indeed a Soviet agent, she would pass this information to her handlers, and it would eventually surface in Soviet communications that the CIA was monitoring. 6 weeks after Robert was given the false information, CIA signals intelligence detected references to the fabricated NATO deployments in Soviet military communications. The information could have leaked through several potential sources, but its appearance confirmed to the FBI that there was indeed a penetration of American military intelligence at a high level. The FBI intensified their surveillance of Elena, and in September 1975, they finally observed her engaging in unmistakable espionage tradecraft. She visited a specific bench in a park, left a newspaper in a trash can, walked through a bookstore, and moved a book from one shelf to another, each action part of a classic dead drop sequence used to communicate with a handler. The FBI now had enough evidence to confront Elena, but they needed to carefully consider the timing and method of her arrest. Robert Morrison was a highly respected general whose reputation would be destroyed if his wife was exposed as a Soviet spy, and there were concerns about the political and diplomatic implications of revealing that the Soviets had successfully run an illegal agent inside American military intelligence for 3 decades. But the security breach was too serious to ignore, and in November 1975, the FBI decided to move forward with the confrontation. When the FBI agents arrived at Elena's house that November morning and called her Ekaterina, she understood immediately that her 30-year operation was over. She did not protest or claim innocence or ask what they were talking about. Instead, she invited the agents to sit down, asked if she could make coffee, and then calmly admitted that yes, She was indeed a KGB operative named Ekaterina Volkov, who had been inserted into American military circles in 1945 with orders to marry an intelligence officer and gather classified information. She explained her recruitment, her training, her deployment to Vienna, and her 3 decades of espionage against the United States with a detachment that disturbed the FBI agents who interviewed her. She showed no remorse, expressed no regret about deceiving her husband or using her children as cover. She said that she had been following orders, that this was her duty to the Soviet Union, and that she had executed her mission to the best of her ability. When asked about her feelings toward Robert and her children, Elena paused and then said something that revealed the psychological cost of her decades-long deception. She said that she honestly did not know anymore whether she had any genuine feelings for them or whether everything she had experienced in 30 years of marriage and motherhood had been performance. She had played the role of loving wife and mother so completely for so long that she could no longer distinguish between authentic emotion and practiced behavior. She said that there had been moments, particularly when her children were young, when she had felt something that might have been real maternal affection, but she had suppressed those feelings because they interfered with her mission. She said that Robert had been kind to her, and that in another life, if she had actually been Elena Kovac, the Hungarian refugee, she might have genuinely loved him. But she was not Elena. She was Ekaterina, and Ekaterina had a mission that required using Robert without developing actual attachment to him. The FBI's next challenge was deciding how to handle Robert and the children. They waited until Robert was at work and arranged to bring him to FBI headquarters under the pretext of a security briefing. When Robert arrived, he was met by senior FBI officials who told him that his wife of 30 years was a Soviet spy who had married him specifically to gain access to classified information. Robert's reaction was initial disbelief, then shock, then a kind of collapse as the implications of what he was being told became clear. Everything he had believed about his marriage, about his life, about the woman he had loved and trusted absolutely, was revealed to be a carefully constructed lie. The children he had raised with Elena were real, but the woman he thought was their mother did not actually exist. The 3 decades he had spent building what he thought was a happy family had been an intelligence operation. Robert was devastated in ways that went beyond professional betrayal. The KGB had not just compromised American national security, they had stolen 30 years of his life, had used his capacity for love and trust as a weapon against him, had made him an unwitting accomplice in his own betrayal. He had shared classified information with Elena because he trusted her, had brought sensitive documents home because he never imagined his wife was documenting them, had discussed strategic plans over dinner because he thought he was talking to his partner in life rather than to an enemy operative. The realization that Elena had never loved him, that every intimate moment and shared experience had been performance, destroyed something fundamental in Robert. He would never fully recover from this betrayal, would spend the rest of his life questioning every relationship and doubting his own judgment. The children, Robert Jr. aged 27, Margaret aged 25, and David aged 22, were informed separately, and each reacted differently to the news that their mother was a Soviet spy. Robert Jr., who was serving in the army following in his father's footsteps, felt that his entire identity had been compromised, that having a Soviet spy as a mother called into question his own loyalty and his fitness to serve. Margaret, who had always been closest to Elena, felt a profound sense of betrayal mixed with confusion about whether anything in her childhood had been real. David, the youngest, responded with anger, refusing to believe the accusations at first, and then, when the evidence became undeniable, cutting off all contact with his mother and refusing to ever speak to her again. The Morrison family case created a diplomatic incident between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviets initially denied that Elena was one of their agents, but the evidence was overwhelming, and eventually they negotiated a quiet prisoner exchange. Elena would be returned to the Soviet Union in exchange for several Americans who were being held on espionage charges in Eastern Europe. The exchange took place in Berlin in February 1976, and Elena crossed into East Berlin without looking back at the FBI agents who had escorted her to the checkpoint. She had spent 30 years building a life in America, and she left it all behind with the same professional detachment she had maintained throughout her operation. Elena, or Ekaterina, as she was known again once she returned to Moscow, was received as a hero by the KGB. She had successfully maintained her cover for 3 decades, had provided invaluable intelligence, and had never broken even when confronted by the FBI. She was decorated, given a comfortable apartment and a generous pension, and offered a position training other illegals in the tradecraft she had perfected. But her return to the Soviet Union was complicated by the fact that she had been living as Elena Morrison for longer than she had lived as Ekaterina Volkov, and she found that she no longer fit easily into Soviet society. She had spent her adult life in America, had raised American children, had become fluent in American culture and mannerisms to a degree that made her seem foreign in her homeland. Ekaterina lived in Moscow for 27 years after her return, working for the KGB until her retirement in 1990, and then living quietly as the Soviet Union collapsed and was replaced by modern Russia. She never married again, never had contact with Robert or the children she had left behind in America, never expressed regret for what she had done. She wrote detailed reports about her operation for KGB archives, describing her methods and her psychology with clinical precision, and these reports later became training materials for Russian intelligence services. She died in 2003 at age 79, having spent more years as a Soviet spy than she had spent as an ordinary person. And her obituary in Moscow identified her only by her true name and mentioned vaguely that she had served the Soviet Union with distinction. Robert Morrison never remarried after Elena's betrayal was revealed. He took early retirement from the army in 1977, unable to continue his career after the security breach that had been caused by his marriage. He lived the rest of his life in Virginia, maintaining minimal contact with his children, and he died in 1998 at age 85. His obituary mentioned his distinguished military service, but made no reference to the wife who had been a Soviet spy, and he was buried with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery. Friends who knew Robert in his final years said that he had become bitter and isolated, unable to trust anyone, perpetually questioning whether anything in his life had been real. The 3 Morrison children each dealt with their mother's betrayal in different ways. Robert Jr. left the army and moved to California, where he worked in the private sector and eventually married and had children of his own. He never spoke publicly about his mother and refused all interview requests from journalists interested in the case. Margaret became a therapist, specializing in trauma and betrayal. And she has written carefully about the experience of discovering that her mother was not who she had believed her to be, about the difficulty of processing that kind of fundamental deception. David never spoke to or about his mother again after 1975, and he built a life completely separate from his family history, changing his last name and moving to a different part of the country where no one knew about his connection to one of the Cold War's most successful Soviet spies. The case of Ekaterina Volkov, who lived for 30 years as Elena Morrison, remains one of the most successful long-term Soviet intelligence operations ever documented. She penetrated American military intelligence at the highest levels, maintained her cover without detection for 3 decades, and gathered intelligence that the Soviets considered invaluable. The damage she caused to American national security is difficult to quantify, but was certainly significant, and the psychological damage she caused to the family she used as cover was incalculable. The case exposed vulnerabilities in American security procedures and led to changes in how intelligence agencies vetted the foreign-born spouses of personnel with access to classified information. But beyond the intelligence implications, the Elena Morrison case raises profound questions about identity and deception and the nature of human relationships. Can someone maintain a false identity for 3 decades without that identity becoming in some sense real? Did Ekaterina ever experience genuine feelings for Robert or the children? Or was she capable of completely suppressing authentic emotion in service of her mission? When she looked at her children or her husband during those 30 years, who did she see? Victims of her deception, or simply tools she was using to accomplish her mission? And what did it mean for Robert and the children to learn that someone they had loved and trusted absolutely had been performing love and trust while actually feeling nothing? Psychologists who studied the Morrison case noted that Ekaterina Volkov had demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for compartmentalization, maintaining 2 completely separate identities simultaneously and preventing them from contaminating each other. The Elena Morrison who baked cookies for school events and attended parent-teacher conferences and hosted dinner parties existed in a completely different psychological space from the Ekaterina Volkov, who memorized classified information and serviced dead drops and reported to KGB handlers. The ability to maintain this separation for 30 years without the mask ever slipping, without ever giving Robert or the children reason to suspect that something was wrong, required a level of psychological control that most people cannot achieve or sustain. But this same psychological control came at a cost that Ekaterina acknowledged in her later years when she was interviewed by KGB psychologists who were studying the long-term effects of deep cover operations. She said that after 30 years of being Elena Morrison, she was no longer sure who Ekaterina Volkov actually was, that she had suppressed her authentic self so completely in favor of her cover identity that when she returned to Moscow, she felt like she was playing a role again, that neither Elena nor Ekaterina felt entirely real. She said that the 3 children she had raised were the only truly real thing that had come out of her operation, that they existed independent of her deception, but that she had forfeited any right to a relationship with them when she chose her mission over any authentic maternal feeling. The most haunting aspect of the Elena Morrison case is the question of whether anything in her 30-year marriage was genuine. Did she ever, even for a moment, experience real affection for Robert? Did she ever feel authentic love for her children? Or was every smile, every embrace, every word of supposed affection calculated and performed? The answer, according to Ekaterina's own statements, is that she genuinely does not know. After 30 years of performance, the distinction between authentic and performed emotion had dissolved, and she could no longer identify where the act ended and any possible genuine feeling began. She had become her cover so completely that her real self had been buried beyond recovery, and that perhaps was the highest price she paid for her success as a spy. The FBI's investigation into the Morrison case revealed that Elena had passed approximately 5,000 pieces of classified information to Soviet intelligence over 3 decades, ranging from minor administrative details to highly sensitive strategic plans. The cumulative intelligence value was assessed as catastrophic to American national security, comparable to some of the most damaging penetrations in American intelligence history. But the damage to the Morrison family was even more devastating and more personal. Robert spent the last 23 years of his life unable to trust anyone, destroyed by the knowledge that the person he had loved most in the world had been his enemy. The children struggled their entire lives with questions of identity and trust, wondering whether anything they remembered from their childhood had been real or whether it had all been performance. The story of Ekaterina Volkov and the family she destroyed serves as a stark reminder that espionage is not a glamorous game, but a brutal practice that destroys lives. That the people who engage in it sacrifice their own humanity and inflict terrible damage on innocent people who become collateral damage in intelligence operations. Ekaterina succeeded in her mission, gave the Soviet Union intelligence they valued, and was rewarded for her service. But the cost of that success was her own identity, the life of a man who loved her, and the psychological well-being of 3 children who discovered that their mother was not who they thought she was. In the final analysis, no intelligence gathered and no mission accomplished can justify or make meaningful that kind of human destruction. This is what real espionage looks like, stripped of romance and adventure, just lies and betrayal and broken people trying to survive the aftermath of deception.